At 72, I thought the hardest part of my life was behind me. But on the day of my daughter's wedding, as I raised my glass in celebration, my new son-in-law sneered at me in front of everyone. "He's just a waiter," he laughed, reducing my entire life to an insult. What he didn't know was that within minutes, the truth would hit harder than any toast, and the whole room would see who I really was. Part 1. The setup and betrayal approximate. 1,500 words. My name is Richard Wallace, 72 years old, retired, or so most people think. To my neighbors, I'm the quiet widower who waters his lawn at sunrise, shops at the corner grocery store, and shows up at church potlucks with a store-bought pie. To my daughter, Emily, I'm Dad, dependable, steady, maybe a little too old-fashioned. And to my soon-to-be son-in-law, Brad, I was about to discover I was nothing but a punchline. The morning of Emily's wedding, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. My black suit was pressed, the white shirt crisp, and the navy tie perfectly knotted. I thought of Susan, my late wife, and how proud she'd be to see our only daughter walking down the aisle. "You'd be fussing over every detail," I whispered her picture on the dresser. "But don't worry, Maggie. I'll make sure she's happy." I slipped a small silver cufflink into each sleeve, the same one Susan had given me on our 25th anniversary, a reminder of where I came from and the family I still carried with me. The church buzzed with excitement. Friends, relatives, and colleagues filled the pews. Emily looked radiant, her dress flowing like a river of white. When she caught my eye before the ceremony, she mouthed, "I love you, Dad." My chest swelled with pride. Brad stood at the altar, tall, sharp-suited, his smile more rehearsed than genuine. I tried to like him for Emily's sake. But something about him always rubbed me the wrong way. The arrogance in his tone, the way he looked at people like they were pieces on a chessboard. Still, I kept my peace. For Emily, the ceremony passed in a blur of vows and rings. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the applause shook the rafters. I clapped, too, even as my stomach twisted with unease. It wasn't until the reception that the unease turned into something uglier. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers and flowers. Guests clinked glasses and laughed. The music softened the background. I sat at the head table, sipping water, watching Emily glow with happiness. Then came the speeches. Emily spoke first, thanking everyone with tears in her eyes. Brad followed with a smooth, charming toast about their bright future together. Guests cheered. Then someone called for me. Father the bride. Speech. I stood, my knees a little stiff, but my voice steady. I just want to say how proud I am of my daughter. She's grown into a strong, beautiful woman, and Susan would be so proud today. To Emily and Brad, may your life together be full of love, respect, and laughter. I raised my glass. Guests clapped politely. That's when I heard it. A mutter, a snicker. Brad's voice, low but not low enough. Respect? From him? He's just a waiter. Spent his whole life carrying plates. What would he know about respect? A ripple of laughter came from his groomsmen, seated close enough to hear. My hand froze mid-toast. The word stung like a slap. I set my glass down carefully, swallowing the lump in my throat. Around the room, a few guests shifted awkwardly. Some pretended not to hear. Others glanced at me with pity. Brad smirked, leaning back in his chair, as if he'd said something clever. Emily's smile faltered, confusion clouding her face. But before she could say anything, the band struck up, and the moment slipped into the hum of music. But I didn't forget. I sat through the rest of dinner in silence, pushing food around my plate. My mind wasn't in the room anymore. It was in the past. Yes, I had been a waiter once, a long time ago, back when Susan and I were young, scraping together rent. But Brad didn't know the full story. He didn't know how I'd built from that, how every plate I carried paid for Emily's education, how every double shift laid the foundation for a life beyond anyone's expectations. He didn't know what I'd become after, and soon he was about to find out, because as luck or fate would have it, the truth was already unfolding in real time. Halfway through the reception, one of Brad's groomsmen pointed at the massive TV screens mounted on the walls. "Hey, turn that up." The hotel staff scrambled with the remote. Suddenly, The local news channel flickered on, and there I was, on live television. The anchor's voice rang out. "We're here with Richard Wallace, founder of Wallace Enterprises, as he pledges a $10 million donation to the city's children's hospital. Mr. Wallace, your generosity is unmatched. What inspired this gift?" On screen, I smiled at the reporter, my suit impeccable, my voice calm. "Every child deserves a chance, and I've been blessed enough to give them one." Gasps filled the ballroom. Chairs scraped. Heads swiveled. Dozens of guests turned to the screen to stare at me. Just a waiter. Emily's jaw dropped. Her eyes darted between the TV and me. Her expression a mixture of shock and pride. Brad's smirk vanished, his face draining of color. His groomsmen looked like deer caught in headlights. And me? I just sat there, slowly raising my glass again. This time, I didn't need words. The truth spoke for itself. The ballroom had gone still, the music fading into background as every eye locked on me. My face, smiling on the television, wasn't the face of just a waiter. It was the face of a man whose name was known, whose work had touched the city, whose money was changing lives. The silence was broken by a smattering of whispers. "Wait, that's him. Wallace Enterprises? Isn't that one of the biggest firms downtown?" I thought he was retired. Brad's smirk had crumbled into something sour. He shifted in his chair, tugging at his collar, as though it had suddenly grown too tight. Emily's eyes glistened as she stared at me. Pride, confusion, and hurt all swirled in her gaze. Hurt because she realized the man she loved, the man she just married, had mocked her father publicly, without even knowing who I truly was. I raised my glass, calm and steady, and let the quiet drag just a moment longer. Then I sipped, slowly. The tension cracked and applause erupted. Guests clapped, some whistled, some even stood. Not for Brad, not for the wedding. For me. Brad leaned toward me, his voice low, sharp, dripping with desperation. "You never told anyone about that." I turned to him, my eyes level. "You never asked." Emily leaned in too, her voice trembling. "Dad, why didn't you say something? Why hide it?" "I didn't hide it, sweetheart," I said softly. "I just didn't need to brag about it." Her hand reached for mine, and for a moment, the sting of Brad's words faded under the warmth of her grip. But it wasn't gone. No, it was still there, smoldering like a coal. The rest of the reception limped forward, but the mood had shifted. People looked at Brad differently now, measured, questioning, even disapproving. Some of the older guests whispered about respect, about how mocking a man, without knowing his story, revealed more about Brad than it did about me. Brad tried to plaster a smile on his face, but the cracks showed. His jaw clenched when a colleague congratulated me instead of him. His hands balled into fists when guests toasted me along with the couple. And though Emily tried to hold his hand, I could see the way his pride bristled. This wasn't just embarrassment for him. This was humiliation. Later, when the guests began drifting toward the dance floor, Brad pulled Emily aside. I followed a few steps behind, pretending not to listen, but my ears were sharp. "Emily," he hissed, "why didn't your dad tell me? Why didn't you?" Her voice was firm, though quiet, because it wasn't important. I didn't fall in love with my dad's money, Brad, and neither should you. Brad's laugh was harsh, bitter. "Not important? Everyone in there thinks I'm a fool. He made me look like an idiot." Emily's voice cracked. "No, you did that to yourself. He didn't have to say a word. You embarrassed yourself." Brad stormed off, jaw tight, leaving Emily with tears threatening her mascara. I walked to her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Don't cry, sweetheart. Today is still your day." She looked up at me, her voice small. "Dad, I think I married the wrong man." The words cut deep, but I didn't say what I was thinking, that she was right, because this wasn't the first time I'd seen his arrogance. But now, everyone else had seen it too. Over the next few weeks, the tension grew thicker. Emily and Brad moved into their new condo across town, but every phone call with Emily carried a strain in her voice. Brad, it seemed, had not taken the wedding humiliation lightly. "Dad, Emily sighed one evening over the phone. He keeps bringing it up. He says you set him up, that you planned it somehow. I chuckled bitterly. Planned it? Emily, I didn't even know the news was airing that segment. I know. I told him that. But he doesn't believe me. He's angry. He says you made him look small in front of everyone. I paused, the heat rising in my chest. He made himself look small. Respect isn't measured in titles or wealth, Emily. It's measured in how you treat people. He hasn't learned that yet. She was quiet for a long time before whispering, I'm starting to see that. But Brad wasn't about to let it go. 2 weeks later, he showed up at my house unannounced. I was in the garden, trimming Susan's roses, when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Brad's sleek black car gleamed in the sunlight as he slammed the door and marched toward me. Mr. Wallace. He spat, not even bothering with Dad. His tone was clipped cold. We need to talk. I set down the shears, straightening slowly. About what? About boundaries. About how you're interfering in my marriage. I arched a brow. Interfering? I've done nothing of the sort. You humiliated me. In front of my family, my friends, my colleagues. Do you have any idea what that did to my reputation? I looked him square in the eye. You did that to yourself, Brad. I didn't say a word. The truth spoke louder than your mockery. His nostrils flared. From now on, you stay out of our business. No advice. No opinions. And for God's sake, no more public displays. Emily's my wife now, not your little girl. The coal inside me flared into flame. My hands clenched at my sides. But I kept my voice steady. She'll always be my daughter. And as long as she needs me, I'll be here. He sneered. We'll see about that. Then he turned and walked away, shoulders stiff, leaving behind the faint stench of arrogance and threat. In the weeks that followed, Brad tightened his grip. Emily called less often. When she did, her words felt measured, as though Brad were listening in the background. She visited less, too, always with some excuse about Brad's schedule, about being too busy. I could feel her slipping away, and I knew whose hand was pulling her. Neighbors mentioned seeing Brad's car speeding out my driveway late at night. Apparently, he'd been coming by when I wasn't home, checking things. One evening, I came back from the grocery store to find papers scattered on my desk. My desk, where I kept important documents, financial records, property deeds. My jaw tightened. He was snooping. Brad wasn't just humiliated. He was scheming. And I knew then that his arrogance wasn't just bruised pride. It was dangerous ambition. That night, sitting alone at my kitchen table, I poured myself a bourbon and stared at Susan's picture on the wall. Maggie, I whispered. He's tried to erase me. Just like that. He doesn't just want Emily. He wants control. Over her. Over me. Over everything. My reflection in the bourbon glass looked older, wearier, but in my chest, something hardened. If Brad thought I was weak, if he thought I'd roll over and let him take what wasn't his, he was about to learn a lesson. Because I wasn't just a waiter. I was Richard Wallace. I had built an empire from scratch. I had fought bigger battles than this smug little man could imagine. And if Brad wanted war, he was going to get it. Brad's warning words, "We'll see about that," echoed in my ears long after his car disappeared down the street. I stood in the garden, Susan's roses trembling slightly in the evening breeze, and realized with sinking heaviness, my daughter wasn't just married to a prideful man. She was married to someone who wanted to cut me out of her life altogether. This wasn't about embarrassment anymore. This was about control. The drifting distance over the next month, the silence between Emily and me grew louder than any words. She stopped calling regularly. When she did, her voice was guarded, like she was measuring each syllable, careful not to say anything that might spark Brad's anger. "Dad, we're just busy," she'd say, her tone rehearsed. "Brad's been stressed with work. You understand?" "I do," I'd answer, though my chest tightened with every lie she was forced to tell. On Sundays, she stopped dropping by for our tradition, coffee and muffins at the diner. Instead, she'd text me apologies. "Next week, Dad. Promise." But Next week never came. It was clear the girl I'd raised, the daughter Susan I had poured our hearts into, was being pulled further and further into Brad's orbit, and I was being shoved out. The evidence of betrayal one afternoon, while sorting through the mail, I noticed something odd. A letter addressed to me, but already torn open. My name scratched on the envelope in Brad's hurried handwriting. Inside, an insurance statement. I froze. Brad had been snooping again. I checked my study that evening, rifling through my desk drawers. Sure enough, a few files were out of place. Bank records, deeds, my will. The rage that burned in me was sharp, but beneath it was something colder. Clarity. Brad wasn't just arrogant. He wasn't just prideful. He was planning something bigger, something that involved my estate, my assets, my legacy, and if I didn't act, he'd get away with it. The breaking point came during Emily's birthday dinner. I arrived at their condo with a carefully wrapped gift, a silver locket with Susan's photo inside. I thought maybe it would remind Emily of who she was, of the love that built her, not the chains Brad was wrapping around her. When I knocked, Emily opened the door with a forced smile. Her eyes flicked nervously to Brad, who was lounging on the couch, scrolling on his phone. "Dad, you made it," she said softly. "Of course." I smiled, handing her the gift. She opened it, her eyes watering instantly. "Oh, Dad, it's beautiful." But before she could put it on, Brad plucked it from her hands. He turned it over like it was a cheap trinket. "A locket? Really?" He scoffed. "Emily doesn't need sentimental junk. She needs stability. A future. Not this." Emily's face fell, and she looked at me apologetically, as though I had done something wrong. That was it. That was the moment. I looked at Brad, at the smug grin curling his lips as he pocketed the locket, like it was nothing. And I knew this wasn't just about bruised pride anymore. This was war. The internal shift that night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. For months, I'd told myself to stay quiet, to let Emily live her life, to avoid conflict for the sake of peace. But peace was no longer an option. Susan's voice echoed in my memory. "Stand up for her, Richard. Always stand up for her." And now, I realized if I didn't stand up, not just for Emily, but for myself, Brad would erase me completely. I clenched my fists. No more silence. No more patience. It was time to remind Brad and Emily who I really was. The plan starts to form. I got up before dawn the next morning, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a yellow notepad. I started writing. Every asset, every property, every account, every contact. I mapped out everything Brad thought he was sneaking his way into. And as I wrote, an idea began to crystallize. Brad thought I was weak, complacent, a relic of the past. He thought my wealth, my legacy, my influence were just things waiting for him to snatch. But he was wrong, because I hadn't built my life by accident. I had fought for every inch of it. And if he wanted to fight, I'd give him one he'd never forget. The first step. Reaching out, I picked up the phone and dialed an old number. "David," I said when my longtime lawyer answered, his voice groggy with sleep. "It's Richard. We need to meet. Today." Within hours, I was sitting in David's office, my files spread across his mahogany desk. "Brad's been snooping." I explained. "I think he's after my estate. I need to protect everything. And I need to do it quietly." David leaned back, adjusting his glasses. "We can restructure everything. Trusts, accounts, put safeguards in place. He won't get a dime without your say-so." "Good," I said, my voice steady. "Do it. And Richard," David added, "do you want him to know?" I smiled grimly. "Not yet. Let him think he's winning. It'll make the truth sting that much more." The spark of revenge walking out of that office. I felt lighter, not because the problem was solved. Far from it. But because for the first time in months, I wasn't just reacting. I was acting. I wasn't the old man sitting in silence while his son-in-law mocked him. I wasn't the father standing by while his daughter was pulled away. I was Richard Wallace, the man who'd built a company from scratch, who'd raised a daughter with love and discipline, who had been underestimated his entire life, and had always come out stronger. Brad had made a mistake the day he mocked me at that wedding. But his real mistake was thinking I'd let him take what wasn't his. A subtle warning that Sunday, I decided to pay Emily a visit. When she opened the door, her face lit up, but quickly dimmed when Brad appeared behind her, arms crossed. "What are you doing here?" Brad asked flatly. "I came to see my daughter," I said calmly. "Is that a problem?" Emily glanced nervously between us. "Come in, Dad." I stepped inside, scanning the sleek, modern condo. It felt cold and personal, like Brad's personality stamped across every corner. We sat. I sipped the coffee Emily offered. Brad sat opposite me, glaring like a watchdog. After some small talk, I set my cup down and looked directly at him. "Brad," I said evenly, "I know what you've been doing. Going through my papers, opening my mail, snooping where you don't belong." His smirk faltered, just for a second. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said too quickly. "Of course you don't," I said, standing. "But let me give you a piece of advice. Never underestimate the man you think is weakest. You might just find he's stronger than you ever imagined." Brad's jaw tightened. Emily looked between us, confusion clouding her face. I kissed her forehead, thanked her for the coffee, and left. But the look on Brad's face as I walked out, the flicker of doubt or fear, was worth more than any words. The decision is made that night. I returned to my house, locked the door, and poured another bourbon. The die was cast. I wasn't going to wait for Brad to strike. I wasn't going to let him keep Emily under his thumb or worm his way into what I had built. I was going to take control. Quietly, strategically, ruthlessly if I had to. Brad thought he was playing chess, slowly cornered me into checkmate. But what he didn't realize was that I'd been playing this game far longer than he had. And now, the board was about to flip. The morning after my visit to Emily and Brad's condo, I woke before sunrise. The house was silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards as the wood shifted with the cool night air. For the first time in a long while, I felt alive, not because of happiness, far from it, but because a purpose had taken root in me again. Brad wanted war. He thought he could inch his way into my life, into my finances, and into Emily's heart until there was no room for me left. But he underestimated me. And if there's one thing I learned in 73 years of life, it's that underestimation is the greatest advantage a man can have. The quiet preparations, I brewed a pot of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my notepad where I'd scrawled my first thoughts the night before. Step 1, protect the assets. Step 2, secure Emily's trust. Step 3, expose Brad at the right time. 3 steps. Simple on paper, but each one required patience, precision, and a steady hand. I called David again, my lawyer, and arranged another meeting. This time, I asked him to set up a trust, untouchable, airtight, with Emily as the beneficiary. The catch? She wouldn't be able to access it until she met conditions I'd outlined. Conditions? David asked, his brow furrowed. "Yes," I said firmly. "She has to be free of Brad's manipulation, independent. I won't see my life's work fall into his hands." David adjusted his glasses. "You're playing a dangerous game, Richard. Better dangerous than foolish," I replied. An old ally that same week, I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Frank Mallory, my old business partner. Frank was retired now, living in Arizona, but when he answered the phone, his voice carried the same gravelly grit it always had. "Richard Wallace. Haven't heard from you in a decade. You still kicking?" "Barely," I said with a laugh. "Listen, Frank, I need a favor. A big one." "Name it." I explained everything. Brad's arrogance, his snooping, his manipulation of Emily. Frank listened quietly, and when I finished, he gave a low whistle. "Sounds like you've got yourself a snake in the family." "Exactly," I said, "and I need to cut the snake off before it poisons everything. But I need someone outside the circle. Someone Brad won't suspect." Frank chuckled. "Richard, you've come to the right guy. What's the play?" That was the thing about old friends. They don't ask why, only how. Setting the trap with Frank's help, we began laying groundwork. Frank still had connections in the business world. He could float my name into conversations, remind people of my influence, my resources, my reach. Quietly, subtly. The goal wasn't to boast. It was to plant seeds. Brad thrived on perception. He cared more about how people saw him than who he actually was. So if whispers started circling about me still being active, still pulling strings, Brad would start to panic. And panic men make mistakes. Emily's visits, but while I worked in the shadows, I also knew I needed Emily. One Saturday morning, I invited her over under the guise of fixing my Wi-Fi router. Brad wasn't with her, which already lifted my spirits. When she arrived, I had muffins baking in the oven. The smell filling the kitchen just like it used when she was little. She sat at the table, sipping coffee, her eyes tired. "How are you, sweetheart?" I asked. She hesitated. "I'm fine, Dad." I gave her a look, the kind that said, "Don't lie to me." Her shoulders sagged. "It's just Brad. He's been on edge. Ever since the wedding. Really, he doesn't like when I come here. Says it's a waste of time." Anger bubbled in me, but I kept my voice calm. "Emily, a husband who tries to cut you off from your family isn't protecting you. He's controlling you." Her eyes shimmered with tears. "I know, but I don't know what to do. He's my husband." I reached across the table, taking her hand. "And I'm your father, and I'll always be here, no matter what he says." She squeezed my hand, whispering, "Thank you, Dad." It wasn't much, but it was a crack in Brad's armor. And that was enough for now. Brad's escalation, of course. Brad didn't stay quiet for long. A week later, he stormed into my house without knocking. "Stop poisoning Emily against me," he barked, his face red with fury. I set down my paper calmly. "I don't have to poison her, Brad. You're doing a fine job of that yourself." His eyes narrowed. "You think you're clever, old man. But Emily's mine now. Everything she has, everything you have, will be ours, one way or another." I stood slowly, my height still enough to match his. "No, Brad, what I have will never be yours. And the sooner you accept that, the less painful this will be for you." For the first time, I saw it. The flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Just a flash, quickly hidden behind a sneer. But it was enough. The financial maneuver by the end of the month. The trust was finalized. Every asset, properties, accounts, investments, was secured. Brad couldn't touch a cent. And with David's help, I made a few moves Brad wouldn't see coming. I transferred small amount into accounts that looked vulnerable, easy to exploit. A baited hook. If Brad thought he'd found a loophole, he'd take it. And when he did, I'd have him. The psychological game, but revenge wasn't just about finances. It was about breaking Brad's hold over Emily. So I began to play the long game. I invited Emily to small dinners. Just her and me. We'd talk about her childhood, about Susan, about the values we taught her. Kindness, respect, humility. I could see the conflict in her eyes. She loved Brad, yes, but she loved me too. And deep down, she knew something was wrong. One evening, after dinner, she finally asked, "Dad, why do you think Brad doesn't like you?" I hesitated, then said, "Because I remind him of what he's not, a man of integrity." She swallowed hard, and though she didn't respond, her silence told me she was beginning to see the truth. Brad's mistake came 2 nights later. Emily called me in tears. "Dad," he went through my phone. He read our messages. He smashed the locket you gave me. Rage surged through me, but I kept my voice steady. "Emily, listen to me. Come here. Tonight, you're safe here." There was a pause and a whisper. "I'll try." But she didn't come. Hours passed, and my calls went unanswered. Brad had tightened his grip. That was when I knew waiting wasn't enough anymore. It was time to accelerate the plan. The calm before the storm the next morning. I drove to Frank's place across town. We sat on his porch, the Arizona sun beating down, and I laid it out. "It's time," I said. Frank nodded. "Then let's pull the trigger." Together, we finalized the details. The bait account, the timing, the exposure. It wasn't just about protecting my wealth anymore. It was about showing Emily, showing everyone, exactly who Brad really was. And when the trap closed, Brad wouldn't just lose money. He'd lose everything. The fire in my chest that night, back in my quiet house. I poured myself a bourbon and looked at Susan's picture again. "I'm going to end this, Maggie," I whispered. "For Emily, for us, for me." And for the first time since Brad had sneered, "He's just a waiter," I felt something burn in my chest. Not anger, not bitterness. Resolve. Brad thought he was playing me. But the truth was simple. I had been playing him all along. The storm I'd been quietly preparing for was finally ready to break. Brad thought he was circling me, waiting for weakness, but the truth was he had been circling a trap. And now, it was time for me to start closing the jaws around him. The bait account, the first step, was simple enough. Patience. David, my lawyer, had helped me set up a decoy account. To anyone snooping, it looked sloppy, a sizable sum sitting there, poorly secured, with a trail leading back to my name. Brad had been sniffing around for months, pressuring Emily, dropping hints about my finances. He couldn't resist temptation, and I knew his pride would push him. A man like Brad couldn't stand the thought of money being left untouched, money that should be his. So I waited. Brad, bites it took less than 2 weeks. David called me one Tuesday morning, his voice tense but triumphant. "Richard, it happened. Someone tried to access the decoy account. Multiple attempts. The system flagged the IP address." "Brad," I asked calmly, though my pulse quickened. David didn't hesitate. "Brad." Clear as day. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading. "Perfect. Now, let's make sure he digs himself deeper." We left the account open just enough, letting Brad think he was clever, letting him siphon small amounts without realizing every move was being recorded. The longer he thought he was winning, the harder he'd crash when the truth came out. Emily's breaking point, but while I maneuvered in the shadows, Emily's struggle weighed heavy on me. One evening, she showed up at my door unexpectedly. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling. "Dad," she whispered, collapsing into my arms. "I don't know what to do anymore." I led her inside, sat her down at the kitchen table, and made her tea. "What happened?" I asked softly. She swallowed. He yelled at me for coming to see you last week. Said you're trying to ruin our marriage." Her voice cracked. He grabbed my arm. "Dad," hard. A white-hot rage surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm for her sake. "Emily, listen to me. You don't deserve this. You never have. You are strong and you are smart. Don't let him convince you otherwise." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "But I'm scared. What if he takes everything? What if he ruins us?" I placed a hand over hers. "Emily, he can't ruin you. Not if you see him for what he really is. And soon everyone will." She looked at me, confusion flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, then said, "Just trust me. I'm working on something. When the time comes, you'll understand." The quiet triumphs over the next few weeks, Brad strutted around like a peacock, convinced he was outsmarting me. At family dinners, he dropped little comments, thinly veiled jabs. Funny how some people just sit on money instead of putting it to use. Guess not everyone knows how to play the game these days. Emily's eyes darted nervously between us, but I stayed silent, letting him puff his chest. Because behind that smug grin, he had no idea he was already on a leash, and I was the one holding it. The friend in the shadows, meanwhile. Frank was working his own angle. Through his contacts, he spread word of a big move coming from Brad. Nothing specific, just whispers about reckless financial dealings. It was enough to stir the waters, to make people in Brad's professional circle curious, suspicious. And as the rumors grew, Brad unknowingly fueled them himself, bragging to his buddies about smart investments he couldn't disclose. The more he talked, the more he dug his own grave. Emily's awakening, the turning point, came one quiet Sunday afternoon. Emily came over again, this time with a notebook in hand. She sat across from me, flipping it open. "Dad, I've been keeping track." Inside, she'd written down dates, arguments, things Brad had said and done. Every insult, every controlling move, every time he tried to isolate her. My chest ached as I read her neat handwriting. She was starting to see. "Why are you writing this down?" I asked gently. Her voice trembled. "Because I think you're right. He's not who I thought he was. And I don't want to lose myself, Dad. I don't want to end up trapped." I took her hand again, pride swelling in my chest. "You won't. You're stronger than you know. And you'll never be alone. Not while I'm here." She nodded, a flicker of resolve in her eyes. That flicker gave me all the strength I needed to move forward. Brad's slips, the final piece fell into place one evening at a charity gala. Emily and Brad arrived late, Brad grinning, Emily looking tired. As I mingled with old colleagues, I overheard Brad boasting to a group of men about his big win. "Let's just say, I've got access to resources others only dream of. Timing is everything, gentlemen." They laughed politely, but I caught the glance they exchanged, one of doubt, even suspicion. And I knew then that Brad was overplaying his hand. The trap was ready. The quiet night that night, back at home, I sat alone in the study. Paper spread before me, documents David had prepared. The account logs, the transfer records, the evidence clear as day. Susan's picture sat by my side. I lifted my glass of bourbon toward her. "Almost there, Maggie," I murmured. "Almost time to show him who he really is." A calm settled over me. Not the calm of surrender, but the calm before a decisive strike. For months, Brad had pushed, prodded, mocked, and belittled me. For months, he thought he was pulling strings. But tomorrow I would begin pulling mine. The first move the very next morning. I paid a visit to David's office. "I think it's time we make this official," I said, sliding the folder of evidence across his desk. David leafed through the documents, nodding grimly. "This is enough to bury him. Legally, financially, socially." "Good," I said, "because I don't just want him stopped. I want him exposed." David's eyes met mine. "You're sure?" I nodded. I've never been more sure. Brad's oblivion that weekend. Brad swaggered into my house uninvited again, helping himself to a beer from the fridge like he owned the place. "You know, old man," he said smugly, "I think I've finally figured out your little game. You pretend you got all locked down, but I know where the cracks are. And when I'm done, Emily and I will have everything." I leaned back in my chair, hiding my smile. "Careful, Brad. Sometimes what looks like a crack is just a mirror, and what you see staring back might be yourself." He frowned, clearly not understanding, but he laughed it off, swigging his beer. I let him, because his laughter would soon turn to silence. The letter the next day. Emily found an envelope slipped under her condo door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printout of Brad's attempted transfers, his digital fingerprints all over them. No note, no explanation, just the truth in black and white. When she called me that night, her voice shook with anger. "Dad, what is this? Did he actually try to steal from you?" I sighed. "Yes, and that's just the beginning. There's more, Emily, much more, but I needed you to see it for yourself." Her breath caught. I don't even know what to say." "Don't say anything yet," I told her gently. "Just watch. The rest will come soon enough." The stage is set that night. As I lay in bed, I felt a strange peace wash over me. The bait had been taken. The evidence was undeniable. Emily had seen the first glimpse of her husband's true colors. And soon the world would see it too. Brad thought he was climbing a ladder, reaching for the top. But what he didn't realize was that the ladder was leaning against a cliff, and I was about to kick it out from under him. The waiting was over. For months, Brad had strutted around like a king, convinced he was pulling everyone's strings. He mocked me at my daughter's wedding, belittled me at dinners, and plotted behind closed doors to carve up what wasn't his. But what Brad never understood was that real power doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from patience. And patience had always been my specialty. The spark to confrontation began on a quiet Friday evening. Emily had invited me over for dinner. Just the three of us. She said she wanted to talk things out. her voice trembling on the phone. I knew immediately what that meant. She confronted Brad with the envelope I had slipped under her door, and he hadn't taken it well. When I walked into their condo, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Emily sat at the dining table, her face pale, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Brad leaned against the counter, arms crossed, a smirk plastered on his face that didn't reach his eyes. Well, Brad drawled as I entered. If it isn't the master manipulator himself. You've been busy, old man. I set my coat down slowly, meeting his stare. Not busy, just careful. Emily's eyes flicked between us, wide and uncertain. Dad, Brad says the papers were fake. He says you're trying to turn me against him. Of course he does, I said calmly, sliding into a chair, because the truth terrifies him. Brad laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. The truth? You're nothing but a washed-up waiter playing rich man games. You can wave around your lawyer friends and your fake bank accounts all you want, but at the end of the day, you're still nothing. My hands clenched under the table, but my voice stayed even. Then prove it. Show Emily your accounts. Show her your transfers. If you got nothing to hide, what are you afraid of? For a flicker of a second, Brad's smirk faltered. Just a flicker. But Emily saw it. Her lips parted, and she whispered, Brad, why won't you just show me? The eruption, that's when the mask cracked. Brad slammed his fist on the counter, making the plates rattle. Because I don't have to prove anything. This is my life, my marriage, and I don't owe either of you explanations. Emily flinched, tears filling her eyes. I rose slowly, my chair scraping back. My voice was low, but it cut through the room like steel. You don't owe explanations, Brad? Then let me explain for you. You tried to steal from me. You've been siphoning money from an account you thought was my nest egg, and I have every bit of it on record. Brad's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Emily turned to him, her voice shaking. Is that true? He stammered. He's lying, Emily. He set me up. Don't you see? He's just trying to poison you against me. But Emily wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at me. Dad, do you really have proof? I nodded. Every transfer, every login, every dollar he thought he was taking. And it's all tied directly to him. Her hands trembled as she pushed away from the table. Oh, my God! Brad's last stand, Brad lunged forward, his voice rising in desperation. Emily, listen to me. He's manipulating you. He's jealous. He wants to control everything. Emily cut him off with a scream I'd never heard from her before. Stop lying, Brad. Just stop. The room went silent, Brad's mouth snapping shut. Emily's chest heaved as she turned on him, her face twisted with fury. I defended you. I believed you when you said my dad was exaggerating. I made excuses for your behavior, for your temper, for the way you treated me. But this, her voice cracked. You tried to rob my father. You tried to destroy the one man who's always been there for me. How could you? Brad's face hardened, the desperation in his eyes replaced by cold anger. Because your father is in the way. He's always been in the way. Everything he has should have been ours. But he hoards it, hides it while we struggle. Don't you get it, Emily? He doesn't want you to have anything. He wants to keep you under his thumb forever. Her voice dropped to a whisper. No, Brad, that's you. The collapse. Brad's composure cracked completely. He grabbed his coat, his words sharp and frantic. You're making a mistake. You'll regret this. Both of you. Where are you going? Emily demanded. Out, he snapped. I don't have to stay here and be attacked. And with that, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily collapsed into the chair, sobbing. I went to her, kneeling beside her, pulling her into my arms. I'm so sorry, Dad, she cried. I should have seen it sooner. I should have listened to you. I stroked her hair gently. Don't blame yourself, sweetheart. People like Brad, they're good at hiding who they are, but the mask always slips. And when it does, the truth comes out. The public reckoning the next week, the real confrontation played out. Not in the quiet condo, but in the glaring light of public exposure. David and I had prepared everything. The account logs, the transfers, the IP addresses, ironclad evidence. And we didn't just hand it over quietly. We made sure it was seen. Brad's employers received an anonymous packet, his so-called friends. Even a few journalists who'd been sniffing around after rumors of his big deals. It didn't take long for the story to spread. By Wednesday, whispers were flying through his social circle. By Friday, his boss called him in for a serious conversation. By Sunday, he was suspended. And then the papers picked it up. Local businessman exposed in financial scheme. Family ties under scrutiny. Brad's face, pale and humiliated, was plastered on the front page. The face-to-face but the true climax came when Brad showed up at my house one night, pounding on my door. I opened it calmly, finding him wild-eyed, disheveled. "You ruined me," he spat. "Do you know what you've done? My job, my reputation, my future, gone." I met his fury with steady calm. "You ruined yourself, Brad. All I did was shine a light on it." His hands shook at his sides. "I could sue you. I could." I cut him off, my voice sharp. "Sue me? Go ahead. I have every piece of evidence. Every file, every transfer, every attempt you made to steal from me. You'd lose, and you know it." His jaw clenched, his chest heaving. "Get out, Brad." I said finally, "You're not welcome here. Not now, not ever. You wanted to tear this family apart. But all you did was tear yourself down." He stood there for a moment, trembling with rage, before finally spitting on the ground and storming off into the night. I closed the door behind him, the sound of the lock clicking like the final nail in his coffin. Emily's choice in the days that followed. Emily moved back in with me for a while, her things packed hastily into boxes. We sat in the living room late into the nights, talking, piecing her heart back together. "I don't know how I didn't see it," she admitted one evening. "You saw what you wanted to see," I said gently. "That's not weakness, Emily. That's love. And love makes us blind sometimes. But now you see clearly. That's what matters." She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "I just don't want you to think I ever believed what he said about you, about being worthless." I smiled, squeezing her hand. "I don't need Brad's approval. I never did, and neither do you. What matters is that we know who we are, and no one can take that away from us." The aftermath word spread quickly about Brad's downfall. His so-called friends stopped returning his calls. His employers cut ties permanently. His reputation was shredded, his arrogance reduced to ash. And me? I felt no guilt, only relief, because justice had finally been served. The quiet victory one evening. I found Emily curled on the couch, asleep, her head resting against a pile of blankets. I covered her gently with a quilt, standing back to watch her breathe peacefully. For the first time in years, I felt at peace myself. Susan's picture sat on the mantel. I looked up at it, whispering, "She's safe now, Maggie. He can't hurt her anymore." And I kept my promise. A soft calm washed over me. Brad had mocked me at the wedding, tried to strip me of dignity, and nearly poisoned the bond between me and my daughter. But in the end, the truth stood tall, and so did I. A quiet morning, the first morning after Emily moved back into my house. I woke before dawn, as I always did. Old habits don't fade with age. The kettle whistled. The scent of fresh coffee filled the kitchen, and I carried my mug out onto the porch. The air was crisp, the sky brushed with streaks of orange. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt still. No tension gnawed at the back of my mind. No worry about what Brad was plotting. No ache of wondering if Emily believed his lies over my truth. It was just me, my house, and the quiet. When Emily patted in a little later, hair tousled from sleep, she gave me a soft smile. "Morning, Dad." "Morning, sweetheart," I said, sliding her a cup of coffee just the way she liked it. One sugar, no cream. She sipped it, exhaling deeply. "This feels safe, like I can finally breathe again." I nodded, but inside, my chest swelled with relief. That was all I had wanted, for her to be safe. Brad's absence, of course. Brad didn't disappear overnight. He tried calling Emily a dozen times in the weeks that followed. At first, she ignored him. Then, when he grew more aggressive, she blocked his number. The final straw came when he showed up outside her workplace, demanding she talk to him. But Emily didn't face him alone. 2 security guards escorted him out while Emily stood tall, her head high, her voice unwavering. "You don't control me anymore, Brad. It's over." When she told me the story that evening, her eyes sparkled with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Strength. "You sound like your mother," I told her, smiling to the lump in my throat. She squeezed my hand. "That's the best thing you could ever say to me." The community's response as Brad's reputation unraveled. Whispers spread quickly through town. At first, some people were hesitant, tiptoeing around the subject when I passed him in the grocery store. But once the paper printed the details of his financial scheme, the tide shifted. Neighbors came by with casseroles, with pats on the back, with quiet words of support. "Good for you, Richard. Standing your ground. You did what had to be done." Even the pastor at church pulled me aside one Sunday after service, his eyes kind. "Justice was served, Richard, and you protected your daughter. That's what matters most." I nodded politely, accepting their comfort. But deep down, I didn't crave recognition. I hadn't exposed Brad for applause or validation. I did it for Emily, for Susan's memory, for myself. Emily's healing living with me gave Emily time to untangle herself from Brad's grip. At first, she cried often, not just out of sadness, but out of anger at herself for not seeing it. I reminded her gently, again and again, "Love isn't blindness, Emily. It's hope. You want to believe in him because you loved him. That's not weakness. That's humanity." Slowly, the guilt lifted. She threw herself into her work, staying late at the design studio, sketching long into the night. And when she came home, she shared her dreams again, the way she used to when she was younger. "Dad, one day I want to start my own company, my own studio. No bosses, no limits. Just me, creating things that matter." I grinned. "Then do it. You've got the talent. And now you've got the freedom. I'll back you every step of the way." She blinked, startled. "You'd help me with that?" I chuckled. "Sweetheart, you forget who I am. I didn't build my life by carrying plates. I built it by investing in what mattered. And nothing matters more than you." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but this time they were happy tears. A new beginning by spring. Emily had found her footing again. She rented a small studio space downtown, filling it with swatches of fabric, boards pinned with designs, and a stubborn potted plant she swore she wouldn't let die. I visited often, standing in the corner while she worked, watching her hands bring her ideas to life. "This is you," I told her one day. "This is the real Emily. Not the woman Brad tried to mold, but the one your mother and I always knew you were." She smiled, her cheeks flushed. "Thanks to you, Dad. You saved me." I shook my head. "No, Emily, you saved yourself. I just reminded you how strong you've always been." Brad's final fall news of Brad's disgrace spread beyond the local paper. One of his business partners in another city filed a lawsuit claiming fraud. Others followed. Within 6 months, his name was mud. His accounts drained, his friends vanished, his opportunities evaporated. The last I heard, he'd left town, moving back in with his parents 2 states away. No one missed him. And Emily, she never looked back. Closure one evening, nearly a year after the wedding, Emily and I sat on the porch again, sipping lemonade as fireflies danced in the yard. "You know," she said softly, "I used to feel ashamed of what Brad said at the wedding, like people were looking at me, thinking I'd married someone who mocked my own father." She paused, turning to me with a small smile. "But now I realize he didn't shame me. He shamed himself. You showed everyone who you really are. And I couldn't be prouder to be your daughter." Emotion rose in my throat, thick and hot. For once, I didn't fight it. I reached over, taking her hand. "Your mother would be proud too," I whispered. "More than you'll ever know." We sat in silence, then the weight of the past year settling into something lighter, something healed. Richard's reflection sometimes. Late at night, I'd think back to that wedding, to Brad's sneer, the laughter as groomsman, the sting of being mocked as just a waiter, and I'd smile, because that moment, painful as it was, reminded me of a truth I'd almost forgotten. No one defines your worth but you, not a son-in-law, not a room full of guests, not even the whispers of a town. I had lived a full life. I had built something from nothing. I had raised a daughter who was brave enough to stand tall, even after being broken. And I had kept my promise to Susan, to protect Emily, no matter what. That, I realized, was enough, more than enough. The legacy a few months later. Emily launched her first official line at a local fashion show. The room was filled with lights, cameras, and applause. I sat in the front row, tears in my eyes as I watched her step onto the stage, radiant and strong. When she gave her closing speech, her voice rang out clear and steady. I wouldn't be here today without my father. He's my greatest supporter, my teacher, and my inspiration. He showed me what resilience looks like. This collection is dedicated to him. The crowd erupted into applause. And for the first time since Susan's passing, I felt whole again. Not because of the applause, not because of the vindication, but because my daughter had reclaimed her future. Peace that night. Back at home, I sat in the quiet of my study, the cufflinks Susan had given me gleaming under the lamplight. I touched them gently, whispering into the stillness, "She's going to be just fine, Maggie." We both did our part. And for the first time in a long time, I felt her presence beside me, not in grief, but in peace. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes, letting the weight of everything finally settle. Brad was gone. Emily was free. And me? I was no longer just surviving. I was living again. Life after storm revenge, I realized, is not the destination. It's a door you pass through to reclaim the pieces of yourself that others tried to steal. When Brad finally vanished from our lives and Emily found her footing again, I thought perhaps that was the end of my story, that the rest of my years would be quiet ones, tending roses, sipping bourbon on the porch, watching my daughter flourish. But as the months passed, something stirred inside me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't weighed down by grief or fear. I wasn't consumed by protecting what little I had left. No, now I had room to breathe, to wonder, to live again. At 72, life wasn't over. It was just beginning anew. An old friend called one crisp autumn morning. I received a phone call from Daniel Harper, an old friend from my early business days. Daniel and I had once shared a dream of building something meaningful together, but life pulled us in different directions. He retired to Florida, while I stayed to grow Wallace Enterprises. "Richard," he boomed over the line, "I read about what happened in the paper. Lord Almighty, you never fail to stir up a storm." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Wasn't me this time, Danny. Just a foolish man burying himself." "Still," Daniel continued, "I couldn't stop thinking about you. You've always been the type to rise after being pushed down. How about we meet up? I've got a spare room at the beach house, and the fishing's never been better." At first, I hesitated. Leaving my home felt strange, especially after everything. But something in me whispered that it was time. Time to step out of the shadow of grief and betrayal. So I packed a small suitcase, kissed Emily goodbye, and boarded a plane to Florida. Salt air and new perspectives, the first breath of salt air hit me like medicine. Daniel's beach house overlooked the ocean, the waves crashing steadily against the shore. The rhythm soothed something restless inside me. We spent the first night on his deck, sipping whiskey as the sun melted into the horizon. Daniel laughed more in an evening than I had in months, and soon I found myself laughing too. "You know what your problem is, Rich?" Daniel grinned, pointing at me with his glass. "What's that?" "You spent so much time protecting what's yours. You forgot how to simply enjoy it. Money's good, legacy's good, but joy? That's the real prize." His words lingered long after I turned in for the night. He was right. For too long, I'd lived like a guard dog, snarling at threats. But what about the beauty waiting just outside the gate? Giving back one afternoon, Daniel took me into town to visit a community center he'd been funding. Kids ran to the halls with soccer balls, Young mothers studied at desks, and volunteers served warm meals. See this? Daniel said proudly, "This is where the real work is. We're too old to climb ladders now, Rich. But we're not too old to lift others up." I walked through those halls, watching the children laugh, the mothers smile, the volunteers serve. Something tugged at me, a memory of Susan, always urging me to give back, to use my blessings wisely. That night, I called Emily. "Sweetheart," I said, "what would you think if we started something together? A foundation. Something in your mother's name." Her breath caught. "Dad, you mean it?" "I do. We both walked through fire this past year. Maybe it's time we help others find their way out too." Her voice trembled with excitement. "I'd love that." The Wallace Foundation within months. The Susan Wallace Foundation was born. Its mission: to support young women starting their own businesses, giving them resources, mentorship, and the confidence to chase their dreams. Emily became its beating heart, blending her design background with her vision of empowerment. I provided the seed funding, the connections, and the wisdom of years spent navigating storms. Together, we watched it grow. The first time we handed a grant check to a young single mother who dreamed of opening her own bakery, I felt Susan beside me. I could almost hear her whisper, "This is it, Richard. This is what we were meant to do." Brad's shadow fades occasionally. Whispers of Brad reach my ears. Word was he'd bounced from one failed job to another, his arrogance now a bitter weight. But by then, it didn't matter. His name no longer carried power in our lives. Emily no longer flinched at the sound of him. She thrived in her studio, her designs gaining traction, her confidence glowing brighter each day. And me? I had stopped thinking of him as an enemy. He was simply irrelevant. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't just exposing him. It was living so fully, so joyfully, that his memory became nothing more than a shadow behind us. The journey continues 2 years later. Emily stood on a stage in New York, accepting an award for her design work and her contributions through the foundation. Cameras flashed, applause roared, and she spoke with grace and power. "I wouldn't be here without my father," she said, her voice strong. "He taught me resilience. He reminded me that worth isn't measured in titles or wealth, but in dignity. This award is as much his as it is mine." The crowd rose to their feet, and as I sat there, tears pricking my eyes, I thought, "Susan, we did it. We raised her right. Peace at last now. When I wake each morning, I don't feel the ache of betrayal anymore. I feel the hum of possibility. Some mornings, I still walk out onto the porch with my coffee, staring at the horizon, remembering the battles I fought. But instead of bitterness, I feel gratitude. Gratitude that I survived. Gratitude that Emily thrived. Gratitude that, even in my 70s, life still had chapters waiting to be written. I'm no longer just a waiter. I'm no longer just a man guarding what's his. I am Richard Wallace, father, builder, dreamer, giver. And my story isn't over. Not by a long shot. Closing reflection as I sit now at my desk, the evening sun casting golden light over the photo of Susan and me, I whisper the same words I whispered a year ago. "She's gonna be just fine, Maggie." We both did our part. But this time, I add something more. And so am I.